Andrew Millison is a senior instructor in the Department of Horticulture at Oregon State University, where he founded the OSU Permaculture Design Program in 2009. Collaborating with experts at OSU, Andrew developed an online permaculture education program with niche offerings that has evolved into a worldwide program that has served thousands of students around the globe. The primary focus of Andrew's 27-year career in permaculture has been water management systems. Andrew has traveled the world filming and analyzing innovative water and land restoration projects as a documentary videographer, where he created educational content for his online courses as well as for the general public on his popular YouTube page. So thank you, Andrew, and welcome.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And just so we don't get too far ahead of ourselves with some of the questions, I don't mind actually pausing at certain points. So Gina, if you could monitor the chat, I may pause after certain sections and just address some of the questions about some of the specific pieces. So please feel free to type your questions into the chat. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen here. And all right. So again, thank you very much, Native Plant Society, for having me here. And it's a pleasure to talk to you all here. I'm here in Corvallis, where it's probably been just about as rainy as it has been in Portland here. So lovely spring we're having. So permaculture, building resilience to climate extremes. I'm going to read the description of the talk just to make sure I kind of stay on task here. Instability is the new normal in a world of climate extremes. I will examine current issues we face and explain how permaculture provides a reparative roadmap. Using examples from the US and around the world, I'll demonstrate how tackling and reversing water mismanagement and land degradation promotes water stability for human consumption, agriculture, survival of forests, vegetation, and wildlife, and can ultimately help cool the planet and stabilize weather patterns. All right. So just a little bit about myself here. That's a little snapshot for my YouTube channel. If you just type in my name, Andrew Millison, you will be able to find it. I work at Oregon State University, and I've been teaching permaculture there since 2009. And one of my prime directives really is to put out high quality free information. At this stage in the state of the world and the state of ecosystems and the state of societies and everything, I feel like permaculture should not be just confined behind a paywall, only available to those who can afford it. And so I do my best to use my position at Oregon State to really put out free content out to the world. So a lot of that ends up on my YouTube channel. One of the big projects we're developing right now is we're sort of we're rehashing our free online introduction course that we put out back in 2016. So you can look out for that if you're interested in learning more. So I'm going to start this talk, and we're going to go, one of the permaculture principles is actually to work from macro to micro, right? So we are going to start this talk with just some basic concepts to kind of lay the foundation for what I'm going to share with you. And then I'm going to share with you projects and examples of this work throughout the world, really. And I'm going to start with the biggest that I can come up with, and then we'll actually kind of shrink down to a little more of the scale that, most of you would ultimately be working on. So we'll start with just this pattern of the watershed tree, because this is really the fundamental pattern with which nature creates land divisions, right? So land is really divided by the ridges, the hilltops, the mountain ranges, and these high points in the landscape delineate watershed basins. And watershed basins that actually you'll see have the pattern of a tree, smaller branches leading to larger branches, leading to bigger branches, and finally leading to the trunk. This watershed basin is the primary land unit of design. Now, a watershed basin is a fractal as well. A fractal is something that keeps the same pattern when you shrink or enlarge the scale, when you change the scale. So we're looking here, this is one small little catchment area in a mountain range, for instance, but if we zoomed out, this small watershed basin is going to be part of this whole larger watershed basin, ultimately a river system, that ultimately most river systems in the world ultimately drain out into the ocean. So the watershed pattern and the watershed tree is kind of the foundational piece of this talk here. And really, the whole planet is just a collection of interconnected watershed basins. Okay, and so this is a wonderful map by Grasshopper Geography, which is this fellow. They're in different. I think they're maybe in Germany or somewhere in Europe. Put out these wonderful maps that show the world and also zoomed into different countries, divided into their watershed basins. Right now, when you look at this, you realize that this, in most cases, has very little correspondence with political boundaries, right? So this is the ecological boundaries of the world, right? And I could probably spend hours just fascinating over this: the Amazon basin and the Mississippi River basin and the Congo River basin, and all the great rivers of the world here are represented with their catchment areas. Okay. And then the United States. So look up where we are, okay, Western Oregon, and the Columbia River Basin. It's kind of this orangish color there in the Pacific Northwest. When you look at the Columbia River Basin, and of course it's cut off, the Columbia River Basin extends quite a ways into British Columbia as well, into Canada. You see the Columbia River Basin, it is a large basin. It extends over a great area, both in the wet parts of Oregon, the Willamette Valley and everything, out to the drier, arid west. And then the Mississippi River Basin, the pink color that occupies the majority of this map. The Mississippi is an incredible, the Mississippi River Basin is really, according to some people, why the United States ultimately is a superpower in the world, because the Mississippi River Basin encompasses such good soil, and it's also the largest navigable river system on the planet. There's no other river basin that has this many navigable rivers, which means transport of goods from such a fertile area is very easy. So there's so many different, fascinating things about geography, and so many fascinating stories when you start to look at things in terms of this watershed perspective, right? So the watershed perspective is really the foundational perceptual, like the lens, the sort of glasses that you're wearing when you're looking at permaculture, when you're looking at designing regenerative systems, when you're looking at regenerating ecosystems on the planet. Now, this is not new. In fact, John Wesley Powell, who was the early American explorer, Lake Powell in Arizona is named after John Wesley Powell. John Wesley Powell was sent out by President Ulysses S. Grant to go and survey the arid West and give recommendations for how the United States was going to colonize the American West. So Powell went out there. Powell was a cool guy, and I think that if he was in modern times, he would probably be someone that a lot of people that were in the native plant society could relate to. right? He was very interested in the Native American culture. He was very interested in geography, natural history. And so he came, of course, he still was, he was definitely pro-colonization. And he came back to Washington after taking years to survey the arid West. And he came back and he said, you know what? We should actually be dividing the states, the political boundaries, by the watershed boundaries. And this here is his map that actually was his proposal of how to divide the states on watershed boundaries instead of the sort of arbitrary boundaries that we ended up dividing the states by. So, and he also proposed that the counties within the states were also divided on watershed boundaries. So the political decision-making units would actually be the hydrologic decision-making units, right? So he had this great plan. He came back to Washington, but the political forces lined up against him did not let it happen. Actually, the railroads did not like this for whatever profit reasons that they had. So I have a video called America's Big Mistake, because basically I feel like if America would have accepted Powell's proposal of watershed boundaries as political boundaries, we would be in a completely different ecological state today than we are, right? So we'll get to that later. But, we can look at the watershed perspective and we can understand the history of great civilizations. We can understand why, for instance, in this image, why, Egypt was such a great empire, which actually had the resources to build the Great Pyramids. And here you can see where Cairo is positioned there. So, we have the watershed tree, and the watershed tree is, these branches and these, that come together in a trunk. And then ultimately, when the great river system flows out into the ocean, it forms the delta. And the deltas are some of the most fertile places in the geography of the planet right here. So when you look at the position of Cairo, set right there at the point where the delta spreads. It's the point where the trunk of the great Nile River is constricted, and then boom, it spreads out into the delta, and you have one of the most fertile areas of farmland on the planet, because it's super hot, super dry, it like never rains. So you have very little like insect problems, that kind of thing. And then you have, historically, before the dams were built along the Nile River, you had floods coming down from a large portion of Africa that would bring all of this silt and debris, and every year they would flood and deposit this new layer of silt on the Nile River Delta, right? So just like, this is a cool picture right here, because it gives a sense of scale. Like, people don't necessarily understand how big Africa is. Africa is a huge continent. So here's the United States of America, the 48 contiguous states, superimposed over the map of Africa, just to give you a little sense of scale. So this shows you just how far the Nile is flowing, right? So it's like, a lot of times, we can look at some of the wonders of the world, like the Great Pyramids, which I've actually had the fortune of visiting twice in my life. We can understand how the geography of the watershed, it's only that watershed that has that much of an area that is flooding, creating that fertile of a delta right there, that is creating the surplus to do things like build the Great Pyramids. I mean, to build structures like these, your civilization has to have this immense amount of surplus energy, surplus labor, to support all these workers. These people are not building something that is like directly sustaining the population. They're building giant tombs and monuments to, the pharaohs. So when I look at that, I see a watershed story. Right. So the watershed is like so defining in human history, and each story, each civilization we look into, we end up seeing this great story of the watershed. So let's jump over to India. Now, I spent this winter, 2 months of this winter in India. filming projects throughout the subcontinent, some of the really most inspiring and large-scale water, permaculture, regenerative agriculture projects. Now, India is a special place for a lot of reasons. I mean, one thing is India this year is actually becoming the world's most populous country on the planet, 1.4 billion people. It's surpassing China in population. And it's got a very rich history, and it has this monsoonal climate. So although India has areas that really get a lot of rainfall, typically that rainfall falls in a very short period of time, and then the remainder of the time is dry. I think of India as like the opposite of Oregon. So in Oregon, we think of like, we have about 4 dry months, I mean, give or take, and 8 wet months, right? With some of those months being wetter than others, of course. India basically has like 4 wet months on the outer end. Some of the places, it gets squeezed the drier the place. Some places have like 1 wet month, between 1 and 4 wet months. And then they have, between typically 8 and 11 dry months. So water management and water collection in India, that's the reason why I think I keep going back there, is because they just have such really, they had to create advanced water management, water harvesting systems in order to work with that unique climate. So in this image here, these are the watersheds of India. And at the bottom, down in the tip, you can see a big pink watershed there, okay? And that's the watershed that we're going to be looking at, to look at one of the largest restoration projects on the planet. So this is the Kaveri River. This is the Kaveri River basin here. And this map outlines, so you see that right there, that's on the tip of India. I'm just going to go back here to this one. So that's that pink at the bottom there. Kaveri watershed, it spans 2 states. It spans the state of Tamil Nadu and the state of Karnataka. And so this is a map that shows the elevation. Basically, the colors represent elevation. The reds are the highest parts of the landscape, and the blues, the dark blue, are the lowest parts there. You can see that delta, right? All the way over on the right-hand side of the image, where the river comes and then kind of spreads out into the ocean, has a very incredibly fertile delta that supported a very abundant dynasty in its day. So the Kaveri River, so this is like, so when we're talking about, I'm kind of going back to my description of what I was going to talk about in this talk, right? I'm going to talk about climate resilience. And we're going to talk about how are we actually going to stabilize the climate of the planet? How are we going to actually, what is the scale that we need to be working at to actually like make a change that can save us here at this point? So I visited a project there that was created by the Isha Foundation. The Isha Foundation is an organization that is founded by, basically it's a guru by this guy Sadhguru. He's one of the most famous gurus in India, and he's very internationally known. I'm sure at least some of the people watching this presentation have heard of Sadhguru. He's like got like thousands of YouTube videos. He's a real charismatic guy, speaks very good English. And so they created this project recognizing that this Kaveri, so back to the Kaveri River here. The Kaveri River is imperiled, right? The flow of the Kaveri River, it used to be a perennially flowing river, and in recent years, the flow of the river has decreased. And the reason the flow of the river has decreased is really due to land management within this watershed. Okay, so this was recognized by Sadhguru and by the Isha Foundation. And they realized that the green cover in this watershed had been greatly reduced, especially since the Green Revolution, since the independence of India. Farmers, people were encouraged to cut trees down, take the trees away, and just do farming for commodity crops. Trees were not seen as valuable. Now, of course, everybody here in the Native Plant Society knows that trees are extremely valuable. So their project is to integrate trees into farming. Now, this is one of those things where, and this is kind of brings up some of the like maybe some of the goals of people that were, say, native plants. Like, we need to reforest, we need to like bring back native forests. But what they realized was, worldwide, there's somewhat of a failure of the strategy to bring back native forests. Just like whether it's the government saying, okay, this land, we're going to restore native forests. But, what the Isha Foundation, what their thing is that, well, if we can actually add some sort of economic profit to the equation, then we can actually encourage farmers, we can actually stimulate farmers to plant trees on their own. So they started research into agroforestry systems and found a number of trees. And, India is very fortunate that they actually have native trees that are good timber species for this tropical climate. So they started producing trees, having nurseries all over the watershed to encourage farmers to actually integrate these timber species into their farms, and have a rotation where they're planting trees, they're cutting them at 25 or 30 years. Typically, they might be like thinning at 15 years, cutting the trees at 25 years, and having this windfall of money periodically, and then they're replanting trees. So it's like in creating a cycle that is beneficial to having trees in order to create an overall increase of tree cover within the watershed. And this is here's one of their nurseries. You can see in the bottom right there, there's me visiting a farm there where they've integrated trees into their turmeric. So this is turmeric I've got in my hand right there. So it's not, they've put the trees at such a spacing that it is not detrimental to the production of the turmeric. So it's like they're still cropping turmeric, getting their normal crop, and they have this long-term crop of trees. And there's all these other benefits, of course, to growing trees, like the mulch that's dropping, increasing fertility, and wind protection, and all sorts of good things, habitat. And so I've been working with a scientist down actually in Silicon Valley who works for an organization in India and also has a tech startup called Good Green Labs. His name is Shubho Biswas, and he's been doing some analysis on some of these sites, these agroforestry sites, to see what's actually happening here. And one thing that they're able to measure with satellites is the NDVI, the normalized difference vegetation index, which basically shows like the change in green cover over time. So you can see here, this is the site that I just showed you the picture of, the turmeric site. So on the bottom left, it's like the site is outlined in kind of a red orange. And then as you move right, it's kind of a little more green. And then as we get up to the upper right there, we see that the site is green. So this is showing that from 2017 to now, they've actually increased the green cover, overall green cover of the site. So that's not just the trees, but it's also that green increase in the NDVI has been shown also in the turmeric crop as well. I just want to say that when I'm done with this little section of the Isha Foundation, I will pause and address some questions as we go. So if you have any questions about this, go ahead and type them in and we will address them in just a minute here. So trees, right? We talked about trees benefits for the farmers, for their economic value, right? And, many people, I don't necessarily have to rehash all of the benefits of trees, but I do want to talk about the benefits of trees in relation to rainfall, because at this point, it is well established that trees, and especially larger areas of trees, forests, have a direct relationship with atmospheric moisture, right? Because, trees transpire moisture up into the atmosphere that meets up with clouds, creates rain. Trees exude fungal spores and pollen and different particles up into the atmosphere that become nuclei for raindrops, right? When you take away the trees, you actually reduce the rainfall. And that's some of what was happening here in this Cauvery watershed, is the deforestation and overall lack of vegetation that had occurred in the last 70 years had actually been a big part of reducing the rainfall and also reducing or also creating a different way that the rainfall moved through the landscape. So when rainfall falls on forests, it soaks in, it kind of slowly gets into the soil. When rain falls on bare ground, it rushes off. So these are the two main reasons that Cauvery River had reduced its flow, basically. You know, so just to kind of remind us, I'll take you back to like 6th grade here for a minute and look at the water cycle, right? Water evaporates from oceans, enters the atmosphere, clouds move over the landscape, right? They fall as precipitation, that water comes back, it flows back into the ocean, some of it goes into groundwater, right? But trees play an important role in the water cycle. And this is something that was not necessarily taught to you in 6th grade, but it's something that now we know. And so one of the major disruptors of the climatic cycle has actually been the reduction in tree cover and forest cover. So this is really what the Isha Foundation is working to solve with this project that they're doing. And, you know, there's this new sort of phrasing coming out calling large areas of forest, calling it biotic pumps, that these large areas of forest, they're transpiring all of this water and this raindrop forming nuclei into the atmosphere. And to some degree, the water that moves through the atmosphere is being attracted to these areas, like the Amazon rainforest, for instance. And so the Amazon rainforest is like a huge part of the atmospheric circulation of moisture, as well as the ecology of the whole, continent of South America, right? So the Isha Foundation has gone and to date, they have produced 84 million tree seedlings that they've distributed to farmers. Now, there is, of course, many of those trees have been planted and harvested already. So there's not 84 million trees that are growing right now, but they've created a system which is now perpetuating tree-based agriculture that is integrating into the crop-based agriculture without a financial detriment to the farmers. And then, there's some proof to this here. So this is a map right here from a well-known organization that documents tree cover around the world. And this shows the net change. This is the bottom left here, the net change in tree cover from 2000 to 2020. So we can see that many of these sub-basins within this area are actually experiencing, from this project, I would say, are experiencing a net gain in tree cover. So it's like, so my point is that the watershed basin scale is really the scale at which we can most effectively make a change. And when you are working at this river basin scale, you are creating a system at the scale that can actually interact with atmospheric moisture. And, so this is like the largest scale that we can basically think of as far as projects, as far as, how we can restore some of these natural cycles within the planet and actually stabilize the hydrologic cycle, because this fixes what we think of as the drought flood cycle. We get lots and lots of rain, it all runs off, creates floods, and then there's no rain, the land dries out because it's too exposed to sunlight and does not have vegetative cover. So I think this is the last, yeah. Oh, no, actually, there's a couple more slides, sorry, in this section, and then I'll break for questions about this real quick. So this is, again, this is from Green Good Labs here. And this is the same Cauvery River Basin. And this shows the green is the amount of vegetative cover, and the red is bare land. You know, this says organic content, right? You can see on the bottom left there, the scale. So high organic content is green, low organic content is red. And this is the dry season. So this is the driest time of the year. We can see that within this basin, we only have, there's a large area of land that has no vegetative cover during the dry period. And I told you, India has a very long dry period. Things deeply dry out at that time. This here is the wettest time of the year, and we can still see the area. So the wettest time of the year, we have a much larger area of organic content, which means areas that are being grown, whether it's cropping, whether it's plants that only put their leaves on, you know, like a tropical deciduous species that put their leaves on during the wet period. There's a lot of tropical deciduous trees in this area, tropical deciduous forests. But the thing that we would pay attention to here are the areas that still have low organic content during the wet period. You're like, what's up with the red areas here, right? How come these are the most degraded areas? These two maps will show you what the most degraded areas are within this watershed basin. And so that would be the logical place to start your work if you wanted to kind of even out the tree cover in this basin. So, okay. Oh yeah, that's the last slide, sorry. This is Sadhguru right here, and this is the project right here. And they actually, so their goal is to bring up the tree cover of this entire basin, in fact, the entire state of Tamil Nadu, to 33%. That's India's stated goals, is to bring the tree cover of the area to 33% tree cover, right? And so their project right now, their goal is to plant 2.42 billion trees. 2.4 billion trees is what they project they need to do to bring the tree cover up to 33% in that basin. So, okay, so can we break for some questions real quick from the chat? I'd love to, if you guys have anything before I move on to the next section.
Yeah, a couple of questions came up. I think they were mostly answered, but first one was where we can locate the maps, those great watershed maps. And there was an answer, grasshoppergeography.com. Does that sound correct?
Yeah.
And then somebody asked, is that the biotic pump effect? I think you mentioned that as well. And what type of trees do they plant in India?
Yeah. So it's interesting. They have I think 30 different eco zones within the watershed. So they actually have different tree selections for each of those zones based on the rainfall and everything like that. So the nurseries that they place are actually have different species. But I mean, the main species that I saw there are like kind of well-known timber species. Teak is one. Right. So teak, I don't know if teak was brought, I'm not sure if it was native or not, if it was brought by the British or not, but the British certainly established a lot of teak plantations, very big tropical timber species.
I believe that teak is native to India.
Okay. Yeah. They have mahogany. Right. So they have mahogany, and then they say they have African mahogany as well. So they probably have a native mahogany, and then they have an African mahogany. And then neem is another big one that they plant. And neem, many people that are gardeners know neem because of its organic pest repellent properties. But neem also is a good timber tree there. And then there's some other ones. There's a few others that I didn't really know before I went there that are like some really fast growing ones. I'd have to look in my notes to tell you, but those are like the sort of mahogany, neem, and teak are like the that's like the main crops that are pretty bomb proof there. Yeah.
Next question. I'm curious about the cycling of tree cutting. Do they get cut all at the same time or done in plots?
Yeah, I visited 4 different farms and I asked that question and I actually got 4 different answers. So because there's a windfall when they get these trees. So in a way, some of the selling it to the farmers is saying like, hey, this is going to be a big chunk of money like once in a generation. So I went to one farm where the guy was like, oh, it's too much work. I'm just going to cut them all at once. I'm going to get this big chunk of money and then I'm going to replant everything. But the other farms I visited were doing it more cyclical. Like they planted one section and then they were planting another and they kind of interplanted. So they would have it where they would kind of maintain that tree cover, which I think is ecologically, I would say, doing it successionally is a lot better. So you kind of maintain, you always have some tree cover and you're kind of cutting here and cutting there, but then, other stuff's growing. So there was a variety. And I think that it kind of comes down to the farmer. Like for the one farm that I had visited, he said, oh, I'm going to cut them all at once. I was kind of like, wow, that's going to be a little bit of an abrupt, there's a lot of trees there. And so I felt like I was not in favor of that, but that's what people do. But he was going to replant. So yeah.
So it sounds like it's more up to the individual farmer.
Yeah. They can't really mandate that. They can just make suggestions.
Next question. Is there danger of soil depletion from constant growing and harvesting trees over and over?
Well, the trees are really, for the most part, they're accessing deeper soil layers. And what they found is that the trees overall are adding because they've got these deep, extensive root systems. They're pulling nutrients from deep down, and then they're pumping them up into the canopy. And then all of the leaves, every farm that I went to talked about how the leaf fall from the trees was a direct fertility benefit for their cropping areas below. So, the question is, will they eventually deplete the deep reservoirs of minerals and nutrients over time? Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I guess theoretically, yeah, if you're, I don't know how long it would take to grow trees. I mean, I think that happens here in tree farms, but these are not like monoculture tree farms. These are like tree plantations that are integrated with other cropping systems. And there's like a lot of diversity of trees. They do encourage a diversity of trees because different tree species actually access different minerals and nutrients in the soil, and they access them at different depths as well. So I think that if the cycling, like here with Douglas fir, for instance, if you're just like cycling the same tree over and over again, it's always accessing the same mineral nutrients and the same soil strata, that you would have more of a depletion. But if you're like always having different kinds of trees and there are different trees planted next to each other, then that's, like diversity is sort of the solution in that situation.
Yeah, I had that question as well, if there was the emphasis of diversity rather than monoculture, but
yeah, it definitely is.
Next question. So is the give of the trees with promise of monetary reward funded solely by the foundation?
So the thing that the foundation does is they provide the trees for super cheap to farmers for 3 rupees per tree, which is like $1 is something like 84 rupees. So they're providing the trees, like you could get like 28 trees or something like that for the equivalent of $1. Now, of course, it's kind of a false equivalent because the buying power of $1 there is completely different. But what the foundation has done is they've made it so any farmer that wants to can get the trees at a very low cost. And I visited one of these nurseries and I talked extensively to the people at the nursery. Another thing is they also created a new sort of cultural ritual where when people have weddings, I don't know if anybody's here ever been to an Indian wedding, but it's like a very serious affair, right? I mean, they have like these massive weddings. Like you'll have a wedding and there'll be like 1,500 guests, and people will save for like years and years to throw a wedding. So they made it where like, when they throw weddings, they give everybody a tree to take home with them, and then they plant the tree in their home, and then they plant it, and then the whole idea is you plant it like in memory of the occasion. So they started this thing, and now they'll have people come in and buy like 1,500 trees for a wedding. They sell them cheaper to farmers, but they're still it's like 7 rupees for a tree for weddings. So so they're real, they get a lot of donations. They funnel a lot of money into this project from other places. And yeah, so having the trees at a low cost is like their primary incentive. And education, they have like field agents that are they'll go to your farm, they'll give you suggested species, they'll give you suggested planting densities, they'll like give you all the information so people are working with the best practices.
Then we had a comment about the mahogany, possibly Swietinia, I'm not saying that right, which is from Central America. Maybe they're using Kaya species. Not sure if you have anything to say about that, but another question: with the added vegetation cover, are the streams back to flowing?
Well, they have a ways to go. I mean, right now, I think the state is still somewhere around 20 to 22% vegetative cover. There are other projects that I went to that have done a lot of water harvesting practices as well. I'm going to show you some of those later on that have actually brought the streams back. So I'm not sure, because right now it's fairly decentralized. So like I said, they've distributed 84 million seedlings, but they really need to distribute 2.4 billion seedlings to really get the tree cover up. So, yeah, there's still definitely like a ways to go with this thing. Yeah. And I really wanted to show this to you just to show you the scale. Like when we're talking about scale, we're talking about like the biotic pump, reforesting the planet. Like what is the scale? Oh, a river basin. Oh, here's a project that's actually at least addressing that in name. Although, I would say like give them like 10 or 15 more years and see how far they can get at that point. Yeah.
Comment, just good to hear that the trees are sold cheaply to farmers who have skin in the game and take care of them. And then one more question: any idea where this magic number of 33% tree cover comes from? This is also Portland's goal.
Yeah. In my understanding, the Isha Foundation actually influenced the government of India. I'm not sure if that's true or not to come up with a 33% number. I'm not totally sure. I guess some scientists or forestry scientists have determined that is like if you want to have a stable climate, basically, and like a stable hydrologic cycle in a watershed, that 33% is sort of the magic like minimum number, basically, to like maintain the ecological integrity. So that's a very interesting question, and I would like to know more about like exactly why 33%. But it seems like if you're saying, oh, Portland's saying that, the whole country of India is saying that, so there's definitely must be either everybody really likes that arbitrary number or there's some data behind it, Yeah. I can't, because I have my like whole thing on, view. I can't see what's my time right now.
It's 7:52.
Okay.
So you're welcome to, speak as long as you want, or you can cut it off whenever you want as well.
Okay. I have a lot of slides, so I have to roll through some stuff here. So
it's up to you, but that did get through all of those questions.
Okay, good. Okay, so let's move on here. So let's move. I'm going to stay in India for a while, just because I was just in India and there's just these really like large scale things going on there. just, we'll get down to scale, we'll get to America, but we're just going to stay in India here for a minute and go to the state of Maharashtra here. Same state that we find this mega city of Mumbai, Pune, and Amir Khan, right? Amir Khan is this massive Bollywood star. Amir Khan is he's like Tom Cruise level of fame. He's been in like so many epic, huge movies and everything like that. So Amir Khan, he had this, revelation through a lot of the work he was doing about the water situation in the state of Maharashtra there. And so Amir Khan started this project, right? This basically a competition, the Satyamev Jayate water cup competition, and started a thing called the Pani Foundation. And the Pani Foundation is like some of the most epic large-scale land transformation happening on the planet today. The Pani Foundation basically created a contest between villages to see which village could create the most amount of water harvesting structures in a 45-day period, right? And so from 2016, you can see I have a little chart down here. They started with 116 villages, 2017, 1,321 villages, 2018, 4,025 villages, 2019, 4,706 villages. Now, some of these villages were repeats. So it's estimated that they had between 2016 and 2019, about 8,000 villages participate in this competition. Now, a village, I think the average size population of an Indian village is about 2,000 people. So 8,000 villages, 2,000 people, we're talking about like, 1.5 million, 2,000, is that 1.5 million or is that 10.5 million people? What's 2,000? So 2,000 times 2 times 8 is 16. So anyway, we'll get to the math later, but a lot of people involved, a large area of land within this entire state here. And the impact on water storage. So they're creating water harvesting structures. I'm going to show you some pictures in a minute here. In India, they measure things in crores and lakhs, and a crore is 10 million. So when they created 55,000 crores of water storage capacity with this contest, we're talking about 5.5 trillion liters. So this is like huge amount of water storage all happening in a short period of time during these contests. And this is what it looks like. It looks like villages and people coming out, thousands of people, hundreds of people, everybody in the village coming out, and by hand mostly, although at some point they got machines in, digging these water harvesting structures. So here, this is what's called a CCT, or continuous contour trench, where they're just digging this ditch here that's intercepting the flow of water. The water's flowing in here. Instead of sheeting off the landscape, it's absorbing into these trenches and absorbing into the ground. Because remember, the monsoon season, you get a huge amount of rain in a short period of time. So water storage capacity is the name of the game. And it's similar name of the game, say, if you go down to monsoonal climates like Arizona, New Mexico, southwestern United States. And so, this is what these landscapes are looking like. So each one, this is after the rain came. So each one of these, trenches you're seeing, this is the same thing from the last slide, like this here, these continuous contour trenches, these are filled with water. And they're just doing these all over the landscape, all throughout, along the contours of the landscape, and also building other types of structures, retention ponds, detention ponds. So when you get these huge inundations of water, the water goes into these structures, it goes down into the ground. Okay, sorry. And the results, so this is where we get to like, how do you restore water? Like a river, like the results of these structures has a very direct result downstream in the stream flow. One of these villages that I visited this last time here, they were saying how basically when the water fills in these continuous contour trenches, it takes about 8 days for them. In this particular village I went to, it takes about 8 days for them to see the water rise in the creek, right? That's basically showing like how long it's taking the water to seep down through the subsoil layers, and then increase the river flow. So, you think of this type of treatment done vastly throughout the landscape, whole watersheds. And that's the thing that this next slide here is showing, is these villages, right? These are a couple different of the maps that were, I'm putting together this India's Water Revolution 2023 video series right now. And these are the maps that we're working with for our digital animations. And on the right-hand side, these are contour maps that show elevation. So the darkest color red are the highest points, the blues are the lowest points here. And so these villages, like the cool thing about these Indian villages is that they encompass a watershed. Because these villages are so old, people worked with common sense, and the political boundaries in these areas correspond with the watershed boundaries. So this is back to, a bunch of slides previously when we were talking about John Wesley Powell. We were talking about the recommendation to actually correspond political boundaries with watershed boundaries. Well, the amazing thing about these villages in India is that their political boundaries, the common lands that the village controls, are delineated by watershed boundaries. Right. So that's like a really huge advantage to them. So a village can go and they can be like, we're going to restore our watershed. And they can go and they can do these water harvesting structures. They also do tree planting, revegetating the steep slopes at the top of the watershed. And then through that, they can restore the water table, the groundwater supply in their micro catchment, in their watershed, in 45 days of concerted effort. So, it's like very rapid transformation, basically. This is us walking here through, you're just kind of like looking at what this terrain looks. This is arid area. They get, 300 to 600 millimeters of rainfall a year. So, 20, 25 inches of rainfall a year here. We're here in the upper watershed, checking it out right here. So the reason why I love India and love going and looking at these projects is they have this great advantage. It says they already have the mentality, by the nature of being in an old civilization, they have the mentality of the watershed and the understanding and the property delineation based on the watershed, right? Because, the pattern of streams, smaller streams combining into larger streams, right? Like this is a foundational pattern of nature, right? So when we look at even like the vascular system of a leaf, we see the same branching watershed pattern, right? And so, the problem is that our pattern of property division does not correspond with the watershed pattern. And this is like the big leap that we need to make in order to actually have restoration at the scale that we can stabilize the climate, like we saw in, the Cauvery watershed basin, the Cauvery River basin, for example. So here, you can see I highlighted the red lines that show like property divisions, right? But then below it, you can see this other pattern, the pattern of water flow. The pattern of water flow does not correspond to the pattern of property division. And to some degree, like I consider this the fundamental flaw of our civilization, or at least in Western civilization, is superimposing this grid, and the way that we really manage water properly is with this watershed pattern, right? San Francisco, of course, people think of like the cable cars going up the steep roads, and San Francisco is like the archetypal, city where a grid is superimposed on this non-gridded hilly landscape, right? And that causes a lot of problems because the streets end up becoming the new water drainage conduits, right? So it's like by its nature, it ends up when we put a grid over a non-gridded landscape, and the straight roads become the new water conduits. By their nature, they dehydrate the landscape, right? So, how do we fix that, right? And that's really like what we're more interested in talking about. So let's look at some examples. This is like the best example in America, basically, of a housing development that is designed around working positively with water flow. So this is Village Homes in Davis, California. Some of you may have even been there. And Village Homes is designed so, well, first off, all of the homes have passive solar orientation. So all the streets are elongated east to west, and all the homes are oriented so they can get the winter sun coming in, and they can get passive heating and passive lighting, right? So that's just an energy saving thing right there. And, only half of the homes in America are oriented properly. And the reason I can say that is because about half of the streets run east to west, and about half of the streets run north to south. So if you're on an east to west running street, then your house is probably oriented in a way that it has better passive solar orientation. So they were conscientious about that, but then they were conscientious about water flow as well. So you can see that there are these cul-de-sacs, right? And the homes are clustered around the cul-de-sacs, but then between, there's a cul-de-sac, and then there's this like green space, and there's another cul-de-sac, and then there's a green space, cul-de-sac, green space, cul-de-sac, green space. And those green spaces are actually water retention basins. So when it rains, all the water from this, all of the hardscape, the roads, the houses, the driveways, the patios, everything like that, garages, all of that is channeled into these water harvesting basins, right? So here's some pictures right here, the pathways going through. And this is like this, Davis, California, Central Valley, California. This is like a horticultural utopia. You can grow so many different types of fruits and nuts, and gardening is just really easy there. And there's, so you can see on the lower right there, this is where they're channeling all the water from the homes and the roads into these basins that are interspersed throughout the development. So the whole development isn't like working within this whole watershed pattern like I showed to you in India, but within the confines of development, they're still working positively with water. And the subsequent vegetative growth that you see here, because water is being absorbed deeply, like the trees are just phenomenal in this area, right? And of course, they have all these really great urban community agricultural areas there. And, in Davis, and like, this is one way that we can work with water flow, even though we were in this dysfunctional pattern, basically, which is creating green spaces, planning developments, planning housing, planning our own yards around creating green spaces, creating wildlife areas, creating agricultural areas, right? Integrating nature into the urban environment, which I'm sure as native plant enthusiasts, I'm sure many of you are already doing there. And, there's a name for this now in this day and age. And the name that seems to be sticking as agrihoods, right? Can we create like an agricultural neighborhood? There's some really great examples of the upper right. I don't know how many people have been to what's it called? It's in Portland, and they turned this old hotel. So that's actually like a motel you're looking at there in the upper right, that big building there. It was like it's in Southeast Portland. It was a super dilapidated like drug motel, and this people bought it and they turned it into this eco village. Somebody will remind me when we stop for questions. Somebody remind me the name. It's escaping me right now. But here's some other just like visionary images of how we can integrate even urban areas with green spaces. I really love the one on the lower left there. It's like this high rise apartment buildings. You usually think that places like that are completely devoid of connection to nature, yet like what an awesome design there. There's trees, there's gardens, there's vines creeping up. You could have totally like native plant areas and be attracting native species. You can have all sorts of agriculture, all sorts of food being grown there. I actually just visited, I was down in Oakland. I visited the largest rooftop farm on the West Coast, Top Leaf Farms in North Oakland. And it's like a 2-acre rooftop farm. I mean, it's very impressive. Some of the really innovative ways that we're integrating food production and water absorption, tree canopy, tree coverage into urban areas. Here's a cool example of this from Tucson, Arizona, right? It's always good to kind of jump out of other climates and look at stuff here. This is Milagro co-housing. So, this is a 40-acre property. So instead of going and doing the normal subdivision thing where they spread houses all over the place and everybody has this long driveway and you eat up all the terrain with roadways and garages and everything like that, they did a co-housing here where they clustered the housing and they clustered all the parking to reduce road surfaces, right? And they created this cluster of houses where everybody has easy access to the native desert. You can see on the right there, those are the kind of like lower right there side. Those are the covered parking areas. Everybody parks there. And then they created an oasis all around this community with the concentration of water from the rooftops, right? So when it rains, all the water actually flows into the center of the community into this successive series of basins before they planted it when they first did the construction. Illustrates the water flow very nicely. So there, I outlined that area there in the blue that shows that concentration area where all the water from the houses is concentrated. And so there's the footprint of the houses that are all also ultimately oriented on passive solar design, right? And, then they also took the wastewater of the community. They treated it in a constructed wetland system and they pump it back up and they use it for irrigation. This is mostly native plants here. I mean, mesquite, ironwood, palo verde, saguaro cactus, barrel cactus. I mean, there's so many wonderful native plants of the Sonoran Desert. They have some garden, they have some fruit trees mixed in, but overall they planted these natives. I mean, and when these natives, like stuff like mesquite, when you give it a little bit of extra water, like a roof draining into a basin, and then you plant a mesquite tree, they grow incredibly more, larger and faster than if you just have them out, they're not receiving extra water. So this is what it looks like in there. Big mesquite tree right there. All sort of garden, shade, native plants. And that's primarily on rainwater and recycled wastewater. So like these are, as we get down, so we started this really large scale, but as we kind of get down to this more sort of human scale, these are the types of systems, that we can see happening here. And, what does this whole thing really resemble, right? So I'm going to jump back to look at the whole site again here. So this thing, the pattern that they're creating there within that sheltered housing area, the houses end up being like the walls of a canyon, concentrating water in to this oasis in the middle. So this is like where permaculture, like we're replicating these patterns and we're looking for because the nicest place to be in the desert is a nice sheltered canyon oasis. So, all right, I'm probably just kind of going on and on here, and I'd imagine that I'm getting close to my time. So So I wish I should have brought my phone in. I could look at the time.
It's 8:13.
8:13. Okay. So I'm going to take like just a few more minutes and just kind of like roll through some other projects here, and then we'll stop for questions. Is that okay?
Sounds good.
Okay, great. So, permaculture, the decision-making matrix, we've got topography, right? We talked about that a lot. We've got these things called sectors, which is like mapping the forces that come in from outside, like the sun, like wildfire, like storms. And then we've got these zones that are basically talking about areas of human management, the places that are closest to the inside, like to the center of human activity, or the places where you place the things that take the highest amount of maintenance, like gardens. And as you move out, you get more and more wild until you think of like zone 5 as completely native and wild. And if you have exotic plants, they're going to be closer in where they can be managed inside, closer to the home. And then we have, a set of principles. So, in permaculture, I'm giving you like a little tiny little like permaculture overview real quick. Okay. Topography, right? We're looking at the shape of the landform, right? Like the sectors, we're mapping different forces as they come in. We've got the sun. We talked about this direction of the sun. We've got the direction of water flow, direction of cold winter winds. And, when we look at a site, we're looking at the areas of greatest human activity, and we're planning our design around things that are closest to the center and farthest to the center, and how much maintenance they require. And then we have a series of principles and ethics that we use to look at and analyze a site. So right there in like a minute and a half, I just gave you basically the entire permaculture design system. You'll have to take a class to really get any depth to that. But, we see these different systems applied in all these different scales and locations. We talked about urban. Here's a farm in Southern Oregon that's, applying permaculture to create this design here that's harvesting water and working with the natural flows of cold air and hot air coming up this canyon. We see examples in Mexico here where they're really doing this like geomorphic design, where they're planning their plantations and gardens and tree cropping all around the shape of the land in order to retain water in the landscape. We've got places like Saudi Arabia where you get, between 0 and 1.5 inches of rainfall a year that are harvesting water from a large rocky expanse and growing agroforestry systems. Right. We've got places in India where we're taking, bedrock plateaus and turning them into farms that support many different tree crops, support native plants, support food crop systems. We've got, ancient systems that we can find, like the Chinampas of Mexico City, where we have these old aquatically based systems where, people are basically farming the water and farming the land in these, systems where you have canals integrated with garden and farming areas. We've got the Hawaiian Ahupua'a system, where we see this like watershed scale system that was developed by indigenous Hawaiian people that, plans their property management from the tops of the mountains all the way down the slopes, all the way, into the ocean. And we've got urban revitalization projects like here in Bengaluru in India, where they're basically recharging the groundwater by digging all of these recharge wells and putting their rainwater from their roofs and their streets directly down into the ground, right? So there's this, very wide breadth. I went very quickly through that because we're so close to being out of time here. I'd like to have as many questions as we can. But I just wanted to kind of like throw this smattering of different examples of how this can be used at different scales. And of course, we teach all of this in our permaculture design courses that we run through Oregon State University. I have an online program that now is in its 12th year. We started in 2011. And we've been continually improving our online courses. We do the permaculture design certificate course. That's our most popular course, and anybody can take that, whether you're a student or whether you're just from the general public. And my YouTube channel, I've been putting a lot of this information out to the general public, that you can just watch for free, and you can get these kind of highly produced little snippets of permaculture methods and examples that I just, I do my best to share these stories with the world. So yeah, let's open it back up for questions. That's got through my presentation. Phew, man.
Thank you. That was amazing.
Yeah.
What a whirlwind.
I know. That's how my brain works. All right.
Before we dive into question, what is your YouTube channel name so we can get that out?
It's Andrew Millison. So Andrew, Andrew, Millison, Millison.
Excellent. Okay, let me get to some questions here. That project in Portland was Kailash. I don't know if I'm saying
Eyelash. Yeah, there we go. That was it. Sorry.
Yeah, so it's there's one comment. It seems worth mentioning that Oregon has active watershed councils, and Portland has a lot of great vegetated bioswales to slow and filter rainwater runoff from streets.
Yeah. Yeah. Portland is like a real leader in, localized small scale water catchment. And it's like, if you can't work pattern wise in the whole watershed, like, you're planning like these big, swales and stuff, having all of these micro catchments spread throughout the whole city is just like a really excellent adaptation, a really excellent technique. Now, I got to say, actually, from the native plant perspective, I got to say the one flaw that I see in the bioswales all over Portland is typically I've seen them planted with exotic ornamental species. And I was like, well, if you're not going to grow food or something, why are you planting like a Japanese maple? Why don't you plant a vine maple? Or, so I think actually that would be a worthy cause to lobby the city of Portland for, is like, let's plant natives in the bioswales that are happening everywhere.
Yeah, good point. Another question about watersheds. Soil and water districts usually named for the primary creek and surrounding watersheds. Mentioned that design around Central Community Plaza is explained by Christopher Alexander's architecture principles. Soil and water conservation district. What are ways to utilize rain runoff on a house that is not designed as part of a larger agri-hood? Is it necessary in a city like Portland that gets a lot of water?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually permaculture design for the single family residence is probably the most popular application. So, there's a whole process you look at to assess your site. I mean, I live on a third of an acre, basically, like a sort of suburban scale here in Corvallis. I don't have a drop of water leaving my site, and I'm on a well. So I'm like recharging my surface, a shallow well here, even in the city. So yeah, I mean, rainwater harvesting cisterns, you can offset your use of city water for irrigation, for toilets, small scale water harvesting. I showed you like recharge wells, like there's a lot of agency that you can have on a single family, residential home.
Yeah, you kind of just answered that next question. How do we replenish depleted groundwater in many parts of Oregon? Well, I don't know. It's a little different.
I mean, a lot of it's just like get it in the ground, Now, there's also the issue, especially in Oregon, where, so many wetlands were drained to establish towns, farms, cities, is that when you start putting water into the ground, you start bringing back these old wetlands, right? Old springs where, that's not necessarily convenient for the people downstream from you. I gave a talk to a bunch of city engineers at one point, to this continuing education talk, and I had people that worked for Portland Green Streets or worked for the different engineering, and they said there's one part of Portland, I can't remember which part, that the soils are very heavy clay, and that the effects of these water harvesting basins has actually been like people are getting their like basements flooded, and yeah, you're bringing back the water table, yeah, you're bringing back the swamp, so there's definitely like this, there's like, we want to bring back the beavers, oh, but now we flooded this whole farm, like it's hard to reconcile when you're restoring things on the watershed scale, but the society has not been built on the watershed scale, so suddenly someone might get flooded, basically. So it's like there's a lot of it's complicated when you start to do these things in urban areas.
Yeah, it's like trying to retrofit a whole
Yeah, exactly.
Many Portland area homeowners get credits on their sewer bills to disconnect their downspouts and create rain gardens. That's great. What would you recommend if I am interested in getting hands-on experience in projects for eco restoration and building water harvesting structures?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the city repair project is doing these days in Portland. I know they do a lot of like benches and murals and stuff like that, but I mean, I think that they probably have some projects that might be an interesting organization within Portland to get involved with. It's, I don't know, like my since COVID, like a lot of things sort of disintegrated, so I'm not totally sure like what is like up and running right now as far as hands-on activities, like who sort of made it through. I was always sending people to Aprovecho down in Cottage Grove, which I think they changed their name to the like Rural Livelihoods Center, but they've always had a lot of really good hands-on programs down there. I would just like start looking at, I would go and search for like hands-on permaculture earthworks, and see what comes up, because there's a lot of people up in Washington not far away that are doing a lot of interesting projects as well. I'm just not sure who's like actively open for business at this point.
Okay. There's some comments about swale planting. It sounds like there are some native plantings out there, and there's some volunteering and lobbying to the Portland Water Bureau to use native plants for the bioswales. So Beth is saying if anybody here wants to get involved with that, you can contact her about forming a working group to plan on doing that. So that's a great thing. The question, what causes more climate problems, water mismanagement or excess carbon in the atmosphere?
Well, I mean, honestly, I think that land degradation, water problems are basically land degradation problems. Yes, we're putting all this carbon in the atmosphere, but if we have intact ecosystems, they act as a shock absorber to these weather extremes, to flooding, so I feel like land degradation is a more like practical problem to be able to address, especially as a common person who like, what can you do? So, the water cycle has been disrupted. People talk about the carbon cycle and like excess carbon, but like the water cycle has been so disrupted through land degradation. I don't want to say like what is more like one or the other, because I don't know. I mean, that's I'm not like omnipotent or anything like that, but I feel like the water cycle and the disruption of the water cycle through land degradation like does not get its due. It's the easiest place, and it's not easy per se, but it's the most practical place to have like rapid, vast action. Just like I've showed you some of these examples, planting millions or billions of trees, harvesting water, having community effort to creating massive amounts of water harvesting structures that lead to revegetation. These things are like really achievable. When you talk about cutting carbon emissions, suddenly it's out of like the common person's hands. Like I can like throw myself at a coal-fired power plant, but if people are still using electricity, it's just like they're confounding issues. When you talk about reducing carbon emissions, it like happens at the national level, right? When you talk about like reversing land degradation and healing the water cycle, it can happen like right outside your door. So I feel like that's why I kind of like focus on this, because I'm like, this is what people like me and you can actually do.
That's great. Very inspiring. Caroline Skinner mentioning that Columbia County is considering greatly reducing wetland protections, so that's something to watch out for. More talk on native plants and the Water Bureau, lobbying the Water Bureau. So, encouraging people to get involved with their local Water Bureau, conservation districts, neighborhood associations, all those places. Trees are carbon sufficient pumps, forests of the lake. Here's a question. Oh, Andrew, your one take to us. Do this one thing this weekend in zone 1.
Oh, if you're going to do one thing
This weekend.
this weekend, well, it seems like it's going to start raining on Sunday, so it's really Saturday there. This time of year, well, I mean, this is a great time to go plant something, to go plant like a shrub, or a tree. I mean, with all the rain we've having, things been kind of cold and dormant. I would say like go to the nursery and find yourself a really nice shrub, a native or food-bearing shrub to plant in your yard. How's that?
I think that's doable.
Mulch it really well.
Yeah.
And connect your downspout to it.